You are listening to the Park Flyer Podcast, where we discuss our RC adventures.
Welcome to the Park Flyer Podcast, where we discuss the ups and downs of the new RC Flyer. Join your hosts, Michael and Jay, as they take flight at the park. Now
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Park Flyer Podcast. I'm Michael from Arizona. With me always, my good friend,
Jay from the hills of Texas.
And, AK Mike is out doing fun stuff again. We're missing him again.
Yes, he's doing
but welcome
again tonight.
I know. It is kind of cool that he's able to do that, though. We wish him the best of luck, and we know he's having fun doing all that kind of stuff. And I think all of us have a little bit of thespian in us. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing the podcast.
That's true.
On our YouTube. So join us on the YouTube channel if you haven't already. Hit that bell, like, and subscribe. That helps us out at our YouTube channel of the Park Flyer Podcast. And also check us out on iHeartRadio. And I just saw that we are on Amazon now as well. So Spotify, Amazon, your favorite podcast. Yep, they're picking us up. Wow. So it's always good to have us joining more podcast platforms. So wherever you are in the world, we appreciate you listening. And thank you so much for your support. Today is a great topic. We're going to kind of delve into electric motors. I think Jay was flying with Jim down at his field and had a mishap with the motor burned up or something. And
yeah, so I think we talked about it a little bit when we had AK Mike on, because it was when he was down last, and we were flying for those couple of days. And this particular day, Jim had brought his SIG out, and this was the one where he was asking. You know, he wanted to exchange his gas motor for an electric motor.
Correct.
And how to do that, make that conversion. And the motor that I recommended him, he had finally gotten it in and installed it on the plane. And we'd flown it a couple of times, and he had to do a little bit of work, but he brought it back out, and we were going to fly it on his new radio and all this kind of stuff. And so it was kind of funny. We get all set up and, get the wings on, check the batteries. We make sure everything's going the right direction. We get it on the ground, and he's going to taxi it out, out into the field. And he does his run up, and the motor goes, reek. It makes that eek sound. And we're like, whoa, that did not sound right. And he goes, whoa, what was that? And I go, I don't know. Go try it again. He slowly revs it up, and the motor kind of comes up. And then he comes back down, and then he kind of quickly brings the motor up, and the motor's jerky. And I'm like, ooh, okay, well, it could be one of a couple of things. Either your connection on your electronic speed controller may have a short, or it's not plugged in on one of the connections all the way. So just pull them out, put them back in, and we'll see what happens. And he did that. And we still got the eek sound. And then I said, well, maybe that's right. You have a new radio, right? This is a new radio with this electronic speed control. He goes, well, you're right. And I go, well, sometimes when you put a new receiver with a new electronic speed controller, they get confused, and you might have to reinitialize it, and just, and get the endpoints kind of set up, and all that kind of stuff. And so we kind of went through the process to do that. And once he went to rev it up again, it made a kind of a creaky sound. So then we just got up to like half speed, and he got it up to half power. It was running it, and then it started making some noises, and we kind of stopped. And then we were just kind of, moving the motor around, or moving the prop around. And all of a sudden we started feeling a rough spot, and I'm like, ooh, that doesn't feel good. And then we thought, well, maybe something came loose and fell into the motor, fell back into the motor. And then, a rock, a pebble, a small screw head, or, a screw sometimes can, get sucked in by the magnetism.
Grub screw or something. Because those magnets will suck up anything metal.
And get caught in there. And I go, it kind of feels like that, and he's like, yeah, that doesn't feel right. And we're like, yeah, okay. You'll just have to get home, take it apart, and see if there's some debris in there or something. So we kind of left it at that. And I don't know, about a week later, Jim calls me up, and he's like, hey man, there wasn't anything broken off inside there. And we're like, well, what's causing the rubbing or whatever? And he goes, one of the windings kind of came loose, and I don't know how it came loose, because they're all like, tightly wound in there, or sometimes they're even glued in there. And he goes, well, it came loose and it was rubbing, and he goes, and it broke. There's a winding that's actually broken in there. And that was catching, was catching in there and causing the rubbing, depending on how it sat and everything else.
Right.
So he goes, this is a brand new motor. And, it's been, he got it a couple of months ago. So it's just been sitting in a box before he installed it on this plane. So he goes, it's not like, I could send it back, it's past the warranty thing.
Right.
I go, well, depending, you might be able to write to the company. It's still within a year. They may take it back. But I said, they're not that hard to repair. If it's just a winding, you might be able to repair it yourself, depending if the company might not take it back or not, if that's the only problem with it. So Jim's like, what? Repair? How am I going to do that? And I sent you and AK Mike a picture of the windings and, everything. And I said, hey, he was asking, hey, this is the problem. What do you guys think? And you wrote some stuff in because, you've had this problem before. I wrote some stuff to him, and I guess it was about another 2 or 3 days later, and he cleaned the motor all up. He re-soldered. And for folks that don't know, the motor windings, each one of the windings, they're like, what is it? Like a lacquer on the wire, like a lacquer covering.
Yeah. It's a coating to keep the wires from,
So this lacquer coating is on the wire. You loop it around each one of the poles. How many times you have to do it, and that lacquer keeps keeps insulation. So even though they look like bare wires, they're not. They're, like you said, it's like they're insulated, but they're not. The lacquer's on there enough to give you that insulation. Right. So what you have to do is you kind of go back, a quarter of an inch from where the break is. You get a piece of sandpaper. And you sandpaper that lacquer off, and then you're able to solder. Your solder will actually hold, and you can, go back and resolder that wire back together. Right. And then if you want, you can go ahead and, paint something on it or something like that. And then, put it back as tightly as you can, and you can kind of rewind it. Depends on where it breaks at. That's the hard part, as to where it rubbed and broke off. I don't remember if we could tell that, but you kind of went through the same thing, right? One of your motors.
Did, yeah. I my motor was a lot smaller, I think, but the windings. There's, in my particular case, it was a Wonder motor, just a really small 1700 or 1500. It had 7 windings or 14 windings around each stator, and I actually found some electrical motor wire that came in multicolors. So mine came in a red, a green, and like a copper color. And so we would wrap those around each stator, and then if it's in a Y winding as opposed to a delta winding, then the 3 wires come to a point, and you solder those 3 points together. Then they go out and they wind around each every third stator. So it's like the green, the red, and the copper, and then you start back with the green, the red, the copper, green, red, and the copper. So it goes around each one of those, and then the ends of those, when you get done with them, they actually come out, and that's what plugs into your ESC. So the ESC runs that current through each stator, and that's what causes the motor to turn. So I was able to I probably redid half a dozen of mine, and fortunately for me, they ran way better than the original ones, because they, they're a tighter wind. I took a little more time as opposed to the, machines or whatever. The machine wound ones are really, really tight because they pull a lot of pressure on them. But the hand ones are usually loose, and they're not very efficient.
And those early motors were all hand done by, fine Chinese craftsmen.
Right.
Children craftsmen, I mean. But anyway, yeah. So they looked not terrible, but they weren't the best. Like you said, as opposed to when you saw your windings, because you took your time, and they're trying to, I have to do 100 motors in an hour. and you were just doing one motor, so you took your time, took that whole hour, got these beautiful windings nice and tight. And yeah, of course, the tighter the windings, the better the motor runs. And luckily for Jim, he didn't have to rewind the whole entire motor. Like I said, his motor is much bigger, right? So it's running on a 6-cell. Right. So, and the stuff you're using it wasn't hair-like wire, but it's close to.
No, it was pretty small.
It was pretty fun.
Because mine was off a 2-cell or a 3-cell battery, not a 6-cell battery.
Yeah, and his
so it wasn't hair.
Yeah. So his were a lot thicker, so he could do, since like I said, around the stator, it was either at the top or the bottom of the stator where it got worn through or it snapped, and then he was able to, since it had a little bit of looseness, he was able to, get it all cleaned up, push them together, soldered together really well, and then I don't know if he just put it back in naturally or if he went ahead and put some epoxy on it and then kind of pushed it in there. Put some epoxy on that to hold it, on the stator. I didn't really ask him about, how he finished it off or, protected it. But, all you have to do, like I said, is you can just go ahead and put some epoxy over the over that wire or the stator in the end and put a good blob to make sure that the motor goes over and doesn't cause any rubbing or anything, but at least it'll hold that wire down so it's not vibrating or it won't come up and have the same thing happen again. And,
right.
We were supposed to, fly today, but unfortunately, he had an illness in the family, so he wasn't able to come out today. So that was unfortunate because I wanted to see just how well that motor worked. So I was pretty excited.
I know when I did mine. We did a side-by-side comparison, and a couple of things. Number one, the battery usage was a lot longer. Because it wasn't draining the battery so quickly. Number two, it was way more efficient. I felt like I got way more power out of it at a lower throttle setting because of the efficiency of the motor. I know my watts went up on that, even on that small motor. I got way more wattage out of it than I did. But I took my time. When I wound those stators, I actually have I took a chopstick and I ground one side down to make like a little flat wooden blade, and that way it didn't mar or scratch, because you can scratch that insulation, that coating that's on the outside. If you use metal tools against it, you can scratch it. That just creates frequency problems. So, but the wooden part, I could wrap that first one around the stator, go around the second, third time, and then the stators are kind of small, so that would allow gaps between the wires, and then I'd take that wooden that chopstick that I ground down to a blade, and then I would push those wires all the way together where they all fit in a perfect, touching. They're the same length, they're the same width, and then I would go all the way to the bottom of the stator, and then I would circle up and go up the top. So it's almost like winding your garden hose, right? You just kind of wind it over one and then wind it over the other. And each time, so I was able to get like 4 going down and 4 coming up, or 4 going down and 3 coming up. And that would be a 7 winder. I think on this one it was 14. So I'd go 7 down and then 7 back up. So you had 7 internal and 7 on the outside. And that would be one stator. And then you'd have to skip over 3 and do the next stator.
Right.
But it was an interesting time. I know when I did it, I was a little nervous. But then once I started doing it, it wasn't that difficult at all. And I know we have a podcast way back in our archives that we talked about, doing motor windings, because it was one of the first, way back many years ago when we started this podcast, one of the things we talked about. So it's good that Jim had this experience. Now, obviously, I did have a motor that threw a bearing on it. It was a big 40 size motor. And I thought that we had a problem with the stator on that, but it wound up being an internal bearing, and there was no fixing that. I could have rewound it, but it wasn't going to help it at all because the bearing had gone bad. So,
well, and the hard part is just finding the bearing itself. I mean, because like you said, motor to motor, you think there, if you're 40 sized, type of motor, there would be a standard size, bearing for it. But between each brand. It's,
well, no, because the shafts are different, right?
Yeah, they use
get
different
a 3.5
shafts.
millimeter
Yeah,
shaft or a
some
5
use a
millimeter
5,
shaft.
Another guy will use a 6 or an 8.
Right.
Yeah, so it's kind of crazy when
Right.
it comes to that stuff. But I mean, they are still repairable. It's just how hard it is to get the parts that you need. And once again, the more popular the motor, the easier it is to get the parts, because then, you know, the company will talk about, you know, what they used or something,
Right.
and you can actually get a replacement part for it. But honestly, for most electric motors, typically the bearings don't go out that quickly, you know, unless it's really cheap, really, really cheap. That's the bad part about it.
So when you guys had that noise, that eeky noise that you hear, I have an airplane that has that as well. You didn't think, or did you mention that may have been the timing?
Yes. That's what we were thinking about. That, you know, that's what I was kind of alluding to. We thought that it may be the timing, and, you know, Jim had he actually has a little programming card, so we could just plug it in and we could just look at it. And that was really convenient, you know, as opposed to trying to figure out the stupid, how many beeps. So I recommend getting a programming card for whatever, you know, motor or plane that you have. It really helps you for these things tremendously, as opposed to,
that's all I have.
For doing most of these things. Let me tell you, trying to figure out how many, is that a beep or is that a buzz or was that a hum? What's that symbol supposed to be? You know, beep, beep, hum, or what? How many was supposed to be? 5 beeps, and then that turns it on. Oh,
and we thought so Morse code was gone, right?
Yeah, really.
The Morse code.
Exactly.
1 long beep and 2 short beeps. That's in the first mode. Yeah, that's kind of crazy. And then you have to do the stick forward in the middle and then back, and then it's kind of nice. I have actually, I think I have programming cards for almost all of my ESCs.
Without doubt.
Yeah.
It makes your life
so worth it. They're an extra $10 or something, and if you have more than one, it's definitely worth it. So
yeah, it definitely will definitely speed up your day, as opposed to, you know, being out there trying to figure out some weird, you know. And the thing you always want to change is the one that's, you know, something special.
That's like 6 in. Right.
6 in, yeah. And then you're like, okay, this is 6, and you're all like, I'm waiting for it. And then you sneeze, and you're like, oh, now we're on 7 or we're on 8. Oh no, what did I change?
Yeah, actually, when AK Mike was down here last time, we were programming the Fun Racer, because somehow it got erased or whatever happened to it, and we were having to go through those beeps. And every time it got there, I'd go, oh, that's it. And then it would change. And then I'd be like, oh, man, that was I changed the battery, you know, from, 4-cell to 2-cell or something stupid. And, or I changed the one time I changed the motor to a soft start versus a hard start. Yep. And then I was like, I gave it the gas and nothing happened, you know, because it's like a helicopter. It just starts slowly rotating. I'm like, okay, well, that ain't going to work.
Looks cool, but
yeah.
But you'll soon crash.
So anyway, he would laugh, and we'd have to start all over and go through the whole programming again. But we finally eventually made it. But that's the Fun Racer is the one that I'm having the problem. It seems to run okay until it gets hot, and then it does that where you give it full throttle and it goes, and it makes that horrible noise, and you just lose all your, and just lose all your thrust out of it. It's terrible. So I'm wondering if there wasn't a loose wire or something in mine as well.
Well,
I had a what's that?
Well, what I was going to say is sometimes it's a loose wire or it's a solder joint that's become loose, or it's breaking free, and you're not getting your contact all the way. And sometimes when in those planes or in foam planes, you know, especially like the Fun Racer, you know, because that's a pretty powerful 4-cell little hot rod. Well, when it goes full power, it actually stretches the front of the plane. It'll actually pull on it. You can't notice it at first when most people. When you go full power and you're holding it or something, you can actually see it. Like the motor will move the motor mount, or it'll move it just enough. And if you have a tight setup where you have all, you know, it's pretty tight in there with all the components, then sometimes it'll just get on that wire and it'll be pulling on it, and it'll cause a break in your solder joint. Where your the escape or ESC comes and it meets with the other bullet point, the bullet point,
the bullet connectors,
and it'll cause just a little hair fraction, and you'll oxidize in there, and you'll start getting a short, and it sucks because
That's a
it'll
good
work,
point.
and then it gets pulled, stops working, or it goes to 2 instead of having 3 connections. What's the word? What am I thinking about for
3
AC
phase
current?
or whatever it goes to.
Yeah, for your
2.
phases, instead of having 3 phases, you only have 2 phases, and the
Right.
motors will still function on that, but it'll start making horrible noises and weird squeaking. And then
you
slow
lose all
down,
you lose all your your speed and your thrust and everything.
Yep. So that may be what's happening, and that's really hard to diagnose. It's almost worth to take off the covering, your heat shrink, and just redoing your solder joints. To ensure that they're all connected on the motor and on the ESC.
Yeah, I may have to do that because if you run a 3-cell in that Fun Racer, it does fine, right? Because you're never
because it's not pulling as much.
Right. That's maybe I'll have to do that because I got my soldering station over here, and I'm in the process of cutting servo wires at the moment, and putting the new ends on them, making a custom size. So anyway, I'll do that when I get my soldering back up. I'll check it out. The other thing that has happened to me as well that you're talking about is when those stators kind of go is that I have had an instance where the rubbing, because the magnets got pulled away from as that thing's spinning.
The actual magnets break loose?
Pulls. Yeah, the actual magnet broke loose and it turned. So rather than, normally when you look inside your electric motor, they're all perfectly lined up with an exact gap between each magnet, and they're usually glued in there or held on by some adhesive. Anyway, I had one that I don't know if when it pulled out, something was sticking out, but it shifted the magnet. And when it shifted the magnet, now it's rubbing because the magnet's not sitting flush anymore. It's kind of at an angle. And every time it came around, it was touching one of the wires, and it ground down one of those wires where it was acting up. So I do know that's happened as well. And that usually, a lot of times, especially for me, flying in the desert with something that doesn't have landing gear, I do a belly landing. Then sometimes
a little piece,
we
just a
do,
pebble.
believe it or not, but we have iron in the soil here.
Oh, really?
And it's readily available, yeah. And those magnets will pick it up. And I've actually landed in the dirt here because a lot of it's granite. And granite, if you have decomposed granite, some of those granules have iron in them. And so,
I never knew that.
It'll suck those.
Wow.
Yeah. You can have iron filings, in the soil just naturally. And then, that magnet, as you land it and belly lands and it kicks up some of that dirt, and you'll find one or two of those rocks, or, if it's got a magnetic property, you'll find it up in that magnet. And I've had one that had a little chunk noise in it. It would go chunk, 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 chunk. And I'm like, what the heck is that? And sure enough, it was just a little bitty, it looked no bigger than, it was smaller than a grain of rice, about a quarter of a grain of rice, but it was hard, it was hard and it was metallic because you would drop it and it would go right.
That's
in
wild.
the motor.
I did not know that.
Magnet. Yeah.
Now I've had where
no, it's not everywhere, but here it is.
Yeah. Normally, what happens to me is my messy desk. I'll put the plane down, be working on it, and then I'll pick it up, and then I'll go to fly it, and then it'll start making some weird noises, and it's like sucked up a little tiny washer. Those thin little washers, that I may use, and it'll just suck up one of those washers, or I'll be looking around for my E-clip, on the back of the little circle clips or whatever. And it'll suck up one of those, and I'll be like, where is that stupid thing? And I'll grab an extra one, I have a box full of them. I'll put it on, and then all of a sudden I'm doing something. I'm like, what is that? I'll look just before I'm about to start flying. I look in there and I just see this little thing poking out. I'm like, what is that? Put on my glasses. I'm looking at it, and then I'm moving the motor around. I'm like, oh, what is that? And then I'm like, get my tools, and I reach in there and I grab it out. And I'm like, oh, there's the part that I was looking for.
Right.
It got sucked into the motor.
Sucked in the magnets.
So.
That's funny. Well, remind me never to let you do surgery on me if your desk sucks up all that stuff.
Yeah, things have
for your
things have gone
afterwards.
horribly wrong if I'm doing surgery on you. Okay, if I'm having to look up on YouTube on how to,
that's about right.
Do an operation on a dog to do an operation on you, things have gone really, really, really bad.
I don't know. Actually, I think I can remember one or two times of us working on airplanes where it wasn't quite surgery, but we were having to do some medical procedures on fingers and
the basic first aid. I'm good
fleshy
on,
parts.
But, it's the sutures that I'm not really good at doing sutures. But doing a CA suture, I'm good.
Butterfly with some CA glue.
A little spritz.
Although don't do that to your dog. I know you did it to your duck once, but don't do it to your dog.
Yeah, I did major surgery on my duck, and it lived too.
That was funny. Yeah, whole nother story though. I think we've gone down that road once or twice. Well, very cool. Well, that's neat. I'm interested to hear on your next go around how this motor worked. Jim, obviously took on a project that he knew nothing about or knew very little about, and I commend him for being able to dive into something. The good news about it, I will tell you from my experience, is that when it came to electric motors and looking at all those wires, I just thought to myself, man, it's at the time that when you and I were flying those little Wonder motors, they were like $5.
Yep.
Is it worth tearing the motor apart, or should I just spend the extra $5 and get more? And I did. I actually would order like 3 or 4 at a time because I knew that if the motor ever died, I wasn't really going to do it. But eventually, I had enough crashes on these foamies where I hit the ground and busted the wires that I had a whole desk full of these little blue Wonder motors. And I'm like, why am I spending $5 every couple of months? Over the course of 12 months, I've spent almost $100 on these motors, which in the overall scheme of things is not much. But, now I've got this whole graveyard full of electric motors. So for me, I kind of threw caution to the wind and was like, really, this motor's torn up anyway. So what if I undid the motor to learn about it?
It's not like you're going to make it any worse.
No, I can't. And so when I started unwinding it, and then, some research and some reading up on it and doing a little, searching around the libraries and the Googles and everything else, I was able to come up with, hey, this is, understand how it works, understand the delta wind versus the Y wind. And that the only difference between the delta and the Y is that I think one's in like parallel and one's in, what's the other parallel or series? You have the battery series. Yeah. One's in parallel, one's in series. And so it's similar to that, not the same exact thing, but yeah, it's just the way that they connect them at the end. Right. And so anyway, I looked all that stuff up and kind of got familiar with it. And then I thought, well, there's got to be some company that sells this electric motor wire. And sure enough, I found it. And once I did one, I was like, well, criminy, I got all these motors sitting here. I'll just do them all. So I had enough. And I think I still got wire left over. It's in my little, the little case that has it in. But I honestly, from that point on, I really never had motors go bad that weren't catastrophic. Right. I mean, these were wires that broke because I kept nosing the airplane on those foamies. If you're on the YouTube channel, you can see those foamies in the back. The motor's on the front, and they were lightweight. And I was learning the 3D, and it would nose over, and it would hit the ground, and then you hit the motor on the nose a couple times, and it just pushes those wires together where one of them will eventually break, and then your motor's dead. So I just swapped the motor out, go fly it again, because the foam's, even if the foam break, I just CA it back together. But now I don't have that problem as much because, my airplanes stay in fairly good condition when I go fly. I don't have as many crashes as I did many, many years ago. So it's worked to my advantage, but that's why I have that extra stuff. And I'm glad that he reached out to us because we were able to give him some advice, and then he just kind of took what we told him and ran. And good job. I'm interested to hear how he likes the new one. So the new one should be way more powerful, more efficient, and I think if he didn't wind. Well,
he didn't rewind
motor,
it. All he did was he just repaired it. He just, like you said, it broke in such a place that he was able to. He didn't have to undo the winding or anything. He just resoldered it and then put it right back in place. He didn't have to, because that's what I was afraid
So
of.
it must have broke at the end of where it comes off the stator, because that's probably that. If it was inside the stator itself in the winding,
yeah, no, it was
a
a place that he could get to. So
yeah.
Now that you mentioned the thing
sense.
about the magnet moving and then rubbing against it, I'm wondering if something like that happened, or he ingested something and then it rubbed against it and caused the break. So
yeah, it doesn't take much to get something on those magnets.
Yeah, so he said that when he ran it up on the bench, it ran up fine. So we'll see how it works in the air.
You know what else I've done that I found is that, I have obviously a workshop back here, and all my tools are, grinding tools and the, saws and all that stuff. And we do work with metal, I have metal brackets and stuff that I used my sander, and I would grind down one side or smooth it out or whatever.
Sure.
And those are metal filings that are laying around, and you take one of those motors near that little pile of, it sucks them all up. And I've actually opened a motor where, you could see all the filings all standing up because they, magnetize themselves, and they, remember those old games where you had the magnet and you drew the mustache on the guy?
Yeah.
Because they were just metal filings in there, and you would shake it and then draw that's exactly what it does inside the motor. So, and those earth magnets are very, very powerful. Very powerful.
Yep.
So I use them for all kinds of stuff, but I love the rare earth magnets. They work really well. Last a long time. They do.
Well, dude, look at the time. Once again, flew by.
I know, it's already gone by. Yeah. So, well, our time is up for this week, but join us in 2 weeks for our next topic, and we are looking forward to having AK Mike back with us here sometime soon. Other than that, see if you can head out to the field and get a report from Jim, and we'll update you on the next go round.
That we will.
All right. I'm Michael from Arizona.
I'm Jay from the hills of Texas.
And we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Let's fly.
You have been listening to the Park Flyer Podcast. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to your next visit. Please give our show a star rating and review, and feel free to email us your questions, topics, or suggestions to parkflyerpodcast@gmail.com.